Hey, Talking Cars fans. We're making plans for our 4th of July episode, and we want to hear from you. So we want to know, what does it mean for a car to be considered American? Does it have to be built here, come from a company based in the US? And what do you consider to be the most American vehicle of all time? Email or text a video to talkingcars@icloud.com and give us your definition of what it means for a car to be American and what you think is the most epic, iconic American car ever. We're going to choose our favorite responses and include them in the podcast. That's talkingcars@icloud.com. Now, on to the show.
Hey, welcome back. I'm Keith Barry.
I'm Alex Nizick.
I'm Gabe Schenhauer.
And this week we are talking about a new electric car, as we so frequently are these days, that we rented. It is Subaru's first fully electric vehicle. It's called the Solterra. And it's based on a Toyota, but we'll talk about that later. Let's talk about the car itself. Itself first, and give it its due. Gabe, Subaru, they haven't had a real electric offering before. They've sort of had that half-hearted plug-in hybrid for a few minutes there. And as the market goes electric and electrifies, do you think this is going to keep Subaru drivers in the fold? Because I can see, I don't know about you, but I know enough about the average Subaru driver to think that maybe there's some interest in electrification here.
Subaru customers have been clamoring for an EV for a while. And yes, you mentioned the token Crosstrek plug-in hybrid. But now, again, this is a collaboration between Toyota and Subaru, and the Solterra plugs in right into that new modern new crop of EVs that converge around $50,000, starting at about $45,000. And it's an SUV. It's functional. It has all-wheel drive, and it can totally answer all the needs and wants of any Subaru customer. And we've experienced it. The car is very pleasant. It's quick, it's quiet, it rides well, it handles responsively. So I think Subaru has a real asset on their hand here.
Yeah. Alex, you've driven it too. What do you think in terms of, because, Subaru's whole selling point is all-wheel drive, and that's sort of par for the course for EVs, and that sort of almost SUV height. It seems like a lot of companies can outdo Subaru now that they're going electric. What do you think about this? Can it compete?
Yeah, it kind of falls into a weird place, I think. But there are some things about it that give it that Subaru edge. You mentioned the standard all-wheel drive. Most other EVs, you do have to kind of go to a higher trim or option all-wheel drive specifically. And we'll talk price later. I don't know that there's a price advantage here with the Solterra that you're getting all-wheel drive for less money necessarily. But another thing, it does come standard with some off-road features. It has Subaru's X mode, which, manages power to each corner a little differently. It also has some ground clearance that some of the other EVs that it competes with, like ID4 and Ioniq 5, don't necessarily have. It's about 8.5 inches, which nothing crazy, but it might be that extra.
We're not going to take it on the rock wall, right?
We are not.
Okay. Yeah.
Not quite there, but it might have enough to get you, down that trail to your favorite hiking spot or skiing trail or whatever it is, right? So I do think there's some stuff there that makes it a little bit more Subaru than maybe some other EVs. But in terms of how it drives, Gabe kind of alluded to it, it's pretty good. I was pleasantly surprised. I don't think it's going to blow anybody away. Now, going back to that value proposition, I do wish that maybe it came in a little cheaper because it doesn't really have the power or the speed of some of these other EVs that you're seeing now, that you just kind of expect them to have a lot of power, a lot of torque. It's about 215 horsepower. I do think that it's enough where you get that electric instant torque sense, but and you get a taste for that, but it's not going to be anything too crazy. In terms of steering handling, I thought it was pretty good. It is responsive, it's predictable, it has a nice weight to it. You do benefit from that battery pack being down low. It kind of hugs through the corners pretty well. Again, nothing, I don't think it's going to take anybody out of, say, a Model Y, where it's really sharp handling, really aggressive kind of ride, and power, not to mention power. But that being said, it does feel pretty nice to drive, and I was happy to see that.
Let me allude to the price here, because even though the merchandising between the Subaru and Toyota is a little different, with the Toyota you can start with a front-wheel drive that's a little less expensive on the BZ4X. The Solterra already has an advantage with the name that you can pronounce and remember. So now, the other advantage is that the Solterra qualifies for the federal tax incentive of $7,500, and the Toyota only has half of that, because Toyota already used some of its credit with the Prius and RAV4 plug-in hybrids. Their credit is in the process of being phased out, so it goes into half, so it's $3,750. Right now, and then at the beginning of 2023, it's going to go to another half of that, so it'll be quarter of the 7,500, and then eventually it'll disappear completely. Another point Alex made is about Tesla, and I think there is a certain type of buyer out there that has a bit of a disdain for Tesla and the whole cult that surrounds Tesla, and I think that Subaru plugs right into that. So I think that's another asset probably.
Yeah, cars say something about their driver, and
Exactly.
cars you're buying into something sometimes when you buy a car. And I think just having a Subaru badge on the front is going to attract people not just from Tesla, but over the BZ4X. That Subaru badge, I think, might be the best selling point for this vehicle.
Yeah. It feels like an EV that, it's for somebody who maybe wants to make the EV jump, right? But maybe it's for an environmental reason or other reasons you might have, but they don't necessarily need like the latest and greatest and the flashiest. And maybe they kind of want a more conventional experience in some ways, and they don't need the weirdness that and quirks that come with some EVs now in terms of like the controls and the interior layout and stuff like that.
Door handles.
Great point. Yes. It's got regular door handles. I think that's, we all appreciated that after driving the EV6.
But that interior, though, I got to say, that interior, although parts of it are very similar to existing gas-powered cars, one of the things that I like best about EVs, and Tesla has done an awesome job with this, Kia and Hyundai have done an awesome job with this, Volkswagen's even done an awesome job with this, is that when you remove things like the transmission and the gas engine from where they need to be in a gas-powered car, it opens up interior space. And this car just doesn't do that. It feels like I'm in this like 1950s Le Mans car where I'm kind of dropped into this cockpit, and, it's got that kind of 80s boombox look to it with a big, the big chunky controls, but some of them are touch screens. And I just personally, I think I find it kind of an ugly interior. I think it looks worse on the Toyota with a sort of lower trim level that we got to drive. But I know that if Monty were here, he would be talking about how hemmed in the cockpit is on his knees and how it doesn't have that room. And I felt the same way. I like a car that's kind of open and airy, and this car's interior doesn't take advantage, and it's a purpose-built EV.
Yes.
I don't understand why it doesn't have that same open airiness and take advantage of the EV design that other EVs like the Model 3, like the Ioniq 5 have done so well.
There are certainly a couple of oddities about the Solterra and the BZ4X, of course. And I think the most striking thing is how far away the instrument cluster is from you. And at least for me, when I sit in the car, the steering wheel blocks a huge part of the cluster for me. So information such as speed and range is not all that front and center for me.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the weirdest things about the car is the steering wheel cluster situation. Most cars, it's designed so that you look through the steering wheel, right, at your gauge cluster. This is designed so it's much further back, first of all, towards the windshield, but then they raised it up so it actually kind of pokes above the dashboard, which is unusual these days. You don't see that too often in cars anymore. So it blocks a little bit of your view, but where it gets kind of unfortunate is you have to lower the steering wheel quite a bit so that you can look over. Or if you don't want to do that, like you were saying, Gabe, it's going to end up blocking some of that display. So I know for me, the steering wheel had to be lowered quite a bit more than I would normally prefer. So it's kind of in your lap a little bit. But then also the cluster itself, the screen that they're using, it doesn't feel like they accounted for the fact that it's so much further away, right? The text is still the same size it would probably be if the cluster was much closer to you. And it's also not any brighter. It doesn't have a shroud around it or anything like that. So I noticed in bright sunlight, it was getting difficult to see and read, and the small text doesn't help. So seems like they had this idea, but then didn't quite, master the implementation of it.
Yeah, it feels like a 2022, 2004 Prius,
In some ways.
Officer, how fast was I going? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. Look over there.
It's all the way down there. Gabe, there are some other sort of electric car specific foibles. Can you walk us through some of the things that are just some really odd choices, I think, in terms of charging
Well, first of all, let's talk about the range. So the range is 222 miles, which is about 40 or 50 miles less than some of the competitors in the EV space, which converge at around 270 miles. So whether or not that's overly optimistic or just conservative, we'll find out. And also another spec that a lot of people are going to probably not pay too much attention to is that the onboard charger is only a 6.6 kilowatt output. So what's an onboard charger, you might ask? Every EV or a plug-in hybrid has an onboard charger, which think of it as a funnel into for the electricity from the wall into the battery. The wider it is, the more electricity it can take. The narrower it is, the more constricted the flow is. So at 6.6, it's a little short of the norm, which these days is around 11 kilowatts. So what does that mean for you? Is that you're going to be limited in terms of the kind of circuit you're going to put your electric vehicle charger in your garage. It's only going to have to be on a 32 amp circuit. So you're not going to benefit from any, from a 48 amp, for instance, that will speed up your charging at home. At least, in terms of DC fast charging, when you're on a long trip in public areas, then the car is competitive and it has an acceptance rate of 150 kilowatt.
So keep that in mind if you're not going to be using DC fast chargers, which are growing, but they're not, they're sort of few and far between compared to these. They call them, Tesla calls them destination chargers, the kind of thing where you plug in overnight and the next morning your car's charged. If you're planning on that while you're driving, to kind of top off, it might take a little longer. So that's,
One other thing is that the Solterra and the BZ4X from Toyota are just practically the identical car. They are so similar. We know that there are no suspension differences. No, other than the badges. They're more similar than the Chevy and the GMC.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Gabe, there are some things that if you're an existing Subaru customer, a loyal Subaru customer driving one now, just to be aware of going into this, if you're thinking about the Solterra, is there are some forward-facing Toyota things that you'll notice when you drive the car. So the infotainment is one of them. Toyota just redesigned their infotainment system, and it's found its way into both the BZ4X and the Solterra. It's this big more than 12 inches display in the center. And we haven't tested it fully, but it seems to respond well. It's fairly simple to operate. It has some weird things about it where you have this giant screen, but you can't look at two different things at once. So you're kind of bouncing around all these menus and stuff. But point being, if you're used to Subaru's existing system, you're going to get something different in this car. And same with some of the ADAS features. I noticed that in the Solterra, they're still using some of the Toyota terminology. So if you're used to some of the words that Subaru is using for like their lane centering system and things like that, you'll notice that the terminology is actually from Toyota. So just something to kind of readjust to if you're hopping in this thing. Now, one thing I'll bring up real quick, we got to see the BZ4X and the Solterra at the New York Auto Show earlier this year, actually, and they had this nice kind of cutaway, right? The body removed, and you could see the platform underneath that they're sharing. And a lot of EVs, especially in the US, where we have an appetite for a higher range, they'll really try to pack as big of a battery pack in the frame that they can. Really push it out towards the motors at the wheel and out to the side of the rocker panels. When you look at the Toyota and the Subaru, they really left a lot of room around the battery pack. So I just wonder, maybe, they're playing really conservative now. Maybe in the future, they left room to increase battery size, right? It's not that the battery is terribly small, but just the range that they're getting out of it is not all that competitive. Maybe, the vehicle starts doing well, they'll give an option later for a larger battery pack or something like that. But just an interesting thing I noticed looking at the guts of the car.
That's pretty interesting. So yeah, so we're going to get ours in pre-orders. You can pre-order one now. We're going to get ours in August or September or so to test. The one that we rented was about $54,000. It starts at about $45,000, and that's again before that $7,500 tax credit. So in theory, you could get an all-wheel drive Subaru Solterra EV for about $38,000. When all is said and done. So that's not that bad compared to the average price of a new car.
That's the price where this really feels like it would be competitive to me, is that sub 40. The lack of range and power compared to others really, makes more sense at that type of price.
Absolutely. So if you're thinking of trading in your existing Subaru for a new Subaru, maybe it's, and you're thinking, I kind of want to go electric. It might be worth waiting for our full review, which should be out of a month or so after that, after we get ours in.
In the meantime, check out our website. John Linkoff wrote a first drive review of the Solterra. So yeah, you'll learn more.
Exactly. A bunch of good photos and everything else. So on to questions. Well, a question from Paul, who sent it in to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. And you too should be sending your questions into TalkingCars@iCloud.com. Paul asks, my question is about how the shortage of computer chips is affecting the car market. Is it reducing the number of cars made? Is it slowing purchases of some models, since some car makers seem to drop certain options but still build new cars? I saw an Audi Q5 on Car Gurus that had been listed for 73 days but is missing some significant features. The listing says the car had a semiconductor shortage credit to presumably cover those missing features. Are other manufacturers doing the same? This sounds like a question to me. It sounds like a question for Gabe to start off with, because you run our car buying program. You're the one who tells us what cars we're supposed to go out and buy anonymously, what dealers might know who we are, and what price to get, and how soon to expect it. So, and you buy a lot of cars yourself too.
Yeah, we've been at it. We've been experiencing the chip shortage on our own skin, and we learned the hard way that some car introductions are delayed. A car that was supposed to be out in March comes out in June, so that's pretty common. Also, some features are missing on cars. For instance, some BMWs tell you that you're not going to get a wireless charging pad, and on our BMW 230i, for instance, it says right on the sticker, you get credit for not having a satellite radio. So these are some of the implications about the chip shortage.
Yeah. Alex, do you think that, that 230i, when we go to sell it, do you think that someone's going to say, oh, it's missing the satellite radio, can you give me like $50 off? Do you think it's going to hurt resale value when things are missing? Maybe not the satellite radio, but some other cars have actually, I mean, GM had a while where they weren't selling trucks with cylinder deactivation. And that hurt fuel economy. Some folks are talking about heated seats. You know, there are some slightly more significant pieces.
Yeah, to your point, I think it depends on the car and the feature. But in thinking about this is an interesting question. I think there's a short term and then a long term, right? Short term, I think it probably would, depending on the feature. Something like heated seats. I know, you know, up here in the Northeast, we all quite enjoy heated seats, heated steering wheel, things like that. So if they were missing, I could totally see somebody, you know, passing on that vehicle because of that, or like you said, asking for maybe a price discount or something. And same with the Silverado with the cylinder deactivation you mentioned. I could see, you know, you think you're going to get worse fuel economy. That could totally influence your decision. On the flip side, though, potentially, and just a theory, but maybe down the road, depending on the vehicle, if it's something like that BMW 230, which might have some kind of enthusiast appeal when it becomes older and more classic later on, maybe some of these features that make it simpler because they're missing might actually increase the appeal. Something going back to the cylinder deactivation, maybe it makes the vehicle a little more reliable, simpler, just has less going on. Potentially, probably more far-fetched, but you know, I think it's tricky too, because at first, as the chip shortage was kind of coming to light, it was automakers were saying, okay, we're going to leave this feature out. We're going to leave this feature out. It was very direct, and you were able to understand what was being, you know, missing or whatever. As this goes on and ad nauseum, it feels it's becoming less clear what's not being included, right? A lot of websites, the dealer websites, they just say, things might not be included because of the chip shortage. Contact your dealer for more information. So I think it might just get a little messy later on as to try to figure out what a car has, doesn't have. You know, the information is not so clear, I guess, going forward.
Absolutely. And Paul had a question too about, you know, is it slowing purchases of some models? You know, I wrote about this, so did Ben Preston wrote about this. A couple of us wrote about this for CR. So if you search for chip shortage on cr.org, you'll find it. But it's what some of the industry analysts that I spoke with said is that automakers are kind of concentrating on the cars they can build. They're sort of triaging their to keep their production lines running, to get the most profitable cars out. So you're seeing maybe they're not going to build as many sedans because they would like to put those chips into SUVs, which are faster selling with higher margins. You're going to see cars, paradoxically, sometimes cars with more features because that can pad those margins and be more profitable for the automaker. So yeah, it's sort of artificially slowing purchases on some models because they're not building them as much. So absolutely, you're going to see some those bottlenecks making it to the model mix. And I think, and what some industry analysts have told me is that, you know, that those crazy high numbers for the average new car transaction price, that can be, you know, that has a little to do with it too, because the automakers are making those most profitable models. They're not making as many of those entry level ones. So interesting time to be buying a car, interesting time to be making cars, interesting time to be talking cars. So thanks so much for talking cars with us today. To find out anything more about the Solterra, as Gabe mentioned, there's a first drive review online at cr.org. There's a lot of information about the semiconductor shortage. There's also articles about which cars are selling for over MSRP and how much they're selling for over MSRP, and which cars you can still get deals on even now in 2022. Thanks for talking cars with us. We'll talk again soon.